sentencing the two men to life imprisonment, the judge told them they were dangerous with a hard and ruthless edge. They crossed your paths, he said, and you showed them no mercy. He said the fact that their victims were criminals was no justification for murder and sent them down for a minimum of 15 years.
On the 6th of August 2006, Jack Womes applied to the CCRC for a second review of his conviction. Throughout the course of the Commission's review, more than 60 letters had been received from Womes, containing additional submissions in support of his application. Womes has also provided the Commission with various supporting documents, including 2 expert reports by David Bristow, dated June 2007 and the 14th of July 2009. The Commission has also met with Womes on 2 occasions to discuss his application, on the 19th of September 2008 and the 1st of June 2010. In addition, the Commission met with Mr Womes' representative, Christopher Bowen, at the Commission's office on June the 25th, 2009. On the 26th of September 2007, the Commission received an application form from Womes' co-accused Michael Steele for his convictions to be reviewed for a second time. A large number of additional submissions have been received from Steele. In reviewing Steele's submissions, the Commission has considered whether any of them could assist Jack Womes' application. The Commission has considered all of the submissions which have been received from Womes, Bowen and Steele, which run to over 600 pages. The Commission has also considered all the supporting documents. In summary, the Commission has addressed the following points in the course of its review. A new witness, Michael Wright, has made a statement that he saw a metallic blue Range Rover in the vicinity of the Rettendon Turnpike at between the hours of 2300 and 23:45 on the 6th of December 1995. A forensic meteorologist, Andrew Rooney-Chris, has provided an expert report in the case. The Commission has considered whether the report provides any support for the proposition that the victim's Range Rover arrived in the lane later than claimed by Darren Nichols. The applicants submit that the prosecution manipulated evidence in relation to the time of death. The applicants submit that the scene of the crime, which was discovered on the 7th of December 1995, was staged and that it contained fabricated evidence. They highlight the position of spent cartridge shells, the fact that the 8th shell was never found, and the passive nature of the scene. It is submitted that there is no evidence in relation to mobile telephone usage, which renders the convictions unsafe. New expert reports by David Bristow and Ross Patel are relied upon. A large number of submissions are made in relation to telephone data. The applicants submit the Crown failed to disclose important evidence at trial, which could have been utilised for the defence, including Statement S177, which is alleged to have been an undisclosed witness statement by Darren Nichols. It is submitted that Essex police colluded with and coached Darren Nichols in his account of events. It is submitted that contrary to the conclusions of the Court of Appeal in 2006, Darren Nichols has embroidered his account at various stages throughout the history of this case. It is submitted that Essex police were complicit in Nichols' meetings with the media. Reports have emerged in the national press since trial in 1997 that Darren Nichols has been involved in further criminality. Numerous allegations of impropriety are made against officers of Essex Police. It is submitted that the Commission's Section 19 investigation was defective. Numerous criticisms are made of the way the Court of Appeal handled the case when it considered it in February 2006. There are submissions which rely upon legal authorities. It is submitted that Donna Jagger's witness statement from the 14th of the 3rd, 1996 contradicts her account as reported by D.I. Florence in his report R4 from the 8th of the 12th, 1995, and the police messages M93 also from the same date. In relation to the timings of events on the 6th of December 1995, Michael Steele submits that since it was rush hour on a snow-driven night, Pat Tate could not have travelled from the Halfway House pub at 1830, where Nichols claims to have seen him, to Workhouse Lane at 1844, where he is alleged to have been when he received a call from Sarah Saunders. Raymond Wright, a witness who gave evidence at trial, described a Range Rover turning into Workhouse Lane at approximately 1900 hours on the 6th of December. The description of this vehicle did not match that of the Range Rover that the three deceased were discovered in on the 7th of December 1995. Submissions are made in relation to the cannabis which was alleged to have been found in the rigid inflatable boat. Further disclosure is requested in relation to possible alternative suspects for the murders. In the course of its review, the Commission has also interviewed and taken witness statements from Sharon Teresa Wright on the 29th of January 2008 and Graham Kim Towns on the 26th of March 2008, obtained an expert report from forensic meteorologist Andrew Runechrist from the 20th of April 2010, instructed an expert in mobile telephone forensics, Dr. James Luck, to interrogate the mobile phone handsets which were discovered with the bodies of the victims. Results received 19th of April 2010. Made various inquiries of Essex Police, including contact with former Detective Inspector Brian White, a meeting with former Detective Inspector George Florence on the 22nd of December 2009, and telephone contact with former Detective Superintendent David Bright on the 21st of January 2008. The Commission has remained alert to those allegations and all of its dealing with the former officers. The Commission also notes, however, there has never been any evidential support for the applicant's allegations against the individuals in question. A new witness, Michael Wright, has made a statement that he saw a metallic blue Range Rover in the vicinity of the Retterton Turnpike at between 2300 hours and 23:45 on the 6th of December 1995. There were two men in the front seats of the vehicle and one large man seated in the rear. Given the victims were driving a blue Range Rover on the evening of their disappearance and their bodies were discovered in the same vehicle, the applicants submit that Mr. Wright's statement constitutes significant new evidence which assists in determining the time of the deaths. It is submitted that Mr. Wright's account undermines the evidence of Darren Nichols that the murders took place at around 1900 hours on the 6th of December 1995 and provides support for the trial evidence of William Jasper and Stephen Rogers, which indicated that the murders may have taken place at around midnight that night. The Commission was provided with Mr. Wright's witness statement on the 31st of October 2007. Having considered that statement and the preceding interviews conducted by Jeff Kelly and Christopher Bowen on the 18th of May 2007, the Commission took witness statements from Mr. Wright's wife, Sharon Teresa Wright, on the 29th of January 2008, and from Mr. Wright's friend, Graham Kim Towns, on the 26th of March 2008. Sharon Wright describes an occasion in late 1995 when she and her husband were watching the lunchtime news on the television, when the news report stated that the bodies of three men had been discovered in a Range Rover somewhere in Essex. Mrs. Wright remembers her husband pointing out to the television and saying, "That's the same Range Rover. That is it. That's the one that cut us up." Graham Towns described an incident which he believes to have taken place sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight on the night before he became aware of the Retterton murders in 1995, when he was the passenger in Mr. Wright's vehicle as it was cut up by a larger 4x4 style vehicle. There were three men in the 4x4, one of whom was a very large man sitting in the rear of the vehicle. Mr. Towns does not know where this incident took place. The Commission has considered Mr. Wright's account in the context of those given by various other witnesses in the case. In addition to the statements of Mrs. Wright and Mr. Towns, the Commission has considered the witness statements of Michael Stenning, Andrew Reynolds, Raymond Wright, Ian Williams, Kevin Tarbuck, Stuart Armstrong, William Jasper, Stephen Rogers, Stephen Hills, Peter Fearbold, Kenneth Jiggins, and PC Knights. Although none of the accounts constitutes new evidence for the Commission's purpose, they have all been reconsidered in the light of the new statements by Mr. and Mrs. Wright and Mr. Towns. The Commission has paid particular attention to the accounts of William Jasper and Stephen Rogers. Mr. Jasper gave evidence at trial that he drove the murderer, who was not Mr. Steele, Mr. Worms or Mr. Nichols, to Rectory Lane, which is near to the scene of the murders, on the night of the 6th and 7th of December 1995. Mr. Rogers gave evidence at trial that he heard a rapid series of gunshots, more than 2 shots, at around midnight on the night of the 6th and 7th of December 95. The Commission has considered whether or not the information provided by Mr. Wright, Mrs. Wright and Mr. Towns gives rise to a real possibility that the Court of Appeal would overturn the convictions in this case. In considering whether or not such a real possibility exists, the Commission has referred to the Section 23 of the Criminal Act 1968 in order to assess the likelihood of the Court of Appeal receiving the new evidence. The Commission considers that in general terms the accounts given by Mr. and Mrs. Wright and Mrs. Towns, i.e. that Mr. Wright was involved in an incident with a Range Rover in the Rettendon area in December 1995, are plausible. However, in assessing the view that the Court of Appeal would be likely to take the credibility of the proposed new evidence, the Commission has considered the following points. Despite public appeals for information soon after the murders, which all 3 witnesses concede they were aware of, none of the witnesses volunteered their information to the authorities at the time. It was only 11 years later, following a fortuitous conversation between Mrs. Wright and Mr. Bowen, that these witnesses agreed to provide their information. When asked why they never come forward previously, all 3 individuals stated that they did not consider it to be relevant to the Rettendon murder inquiry. If this case was referred, the Court of Appeal would need to decide whether it considered this to be a plausible explanation for the 11-year delay in coming forward. The Court's decision on this issue would be likely to influence its overall view of the credibility of what the proposed new witnesses have to say. In Mr. Wright's witness statement dated the 12th of August 2007, there was no mention of the registration number of the Range Rover which he saw in December 1995. However, in an interview on the 18th of May 2007, Mr. Wright stated that he could remember that there were 2 4s in the registration number. He confirmed that he did not write down any details from the registration number at the time of the incident. He also confirmed that he had seen the registration number plate in television footage subsequent to the murders. If this case was referred, the Court of Appeal would have to consider the credibility of Mr. Wright's claim to have remembered 2 4s in the registration number in the context of the fact that he did not make any note of the number and then subsequently saw the full registration number plate pictured in television footage. In an interview on the 18th of May 2007, Mr. Wright described the rear seat passenger wearing a white t-shirt. The Commission observes that Mr. Tate was not wearing a white t-shirt on the night in question, and nor were the other 2 victims. However, a photograph of Mr. Tate was shown during subsequent television news coverage of the murders, which depicted Mr. Tate wearing a white t-shirt. The Commission considered that Mr. Wright's assertion implies that at least some of his account may have originated from the television news coverage of the murders. The Commission also notes that a comparison of Mr. Wright's statement with that of his wife received an inconsistency in their accounts. Page 5 of Mrs. Wright's statement includes the following comment. I also remember that when Mike first mentioned this to me, when we saw it on the TV, that he remembered at the end of the lane being taped off by the police, and that had seen this when he drove home the same way. That helped him to put 2 and 2 together. The latest he would have arrived home would have been about between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. The Commission observes that the victims' bodies were discovered just after 8 a.m. on the 7th of December 1995, so it seems unlikely that he could have seen the lane being taped off by police when he was on his way home from work. Also, page 3 of his statement, Mr. Wright states, "My work finished at about 6 on Thursday the 7th of December 1995. Nothing of note occurred during my return home, which was the outbound journey in reverse. I got home about 7:38 a.m. and went to bed." The Commission considers that the inconsistency is another which would be likely to affect the Court of Appeal's view of the credibility of the accounts given by Mr. and Mrs. Wright. Having considered these points, the Commission observes there are a number of reasons why the Court of Appeal may decide that the proposed new evidence is not capable of belief. The Commission observes that Mr. Wright's account, taken at its highest, is that he saw a blue Range Rover containing 3 male passengers in the vicinity of the Retterton Turnpike at between 2300 hours and 23:45 hours on the 6th of December 1995. Even if this evidence was accepted by the Court of Appeal, the court would need to assess whether it might afford a ground for allowing an appeal. Having considered the accounts of Mr. Wright, Mrs. Wright, and Mr. Towns, the Commission does not consider that there is a real possibility that the Court of Appeal would conclude that they provide strong enough evidence to afford a ground for allowing an appeal. The Commission notes, in particular, that Mr. Wright describes a Range Rover approaching the Retterton Turnpike from the north and turning east towards South Woodham Ferris. It appears, therefore, that the vehicle had already passed the entrance to Workhouse Lane when it was seen by Mr. Wright. It follows that if the victim's vehicle, the Range Rover, would have either have had to turn around and go back to Workhouse Lane via the old A130 or travel to Workhouse Lane via Rectory Lane and across the fields of Whitehouse Farm. The Commission considers the latter scenario to be highly unlikely, as it would have involved crossing the fields, lifting the locked gate out of its footing, turning the Range Rover around in the lane for no obvious reason, and then replacing the locked gate into its footing. Mr. Wright said he saw a Range Rover between 2300 and 23:45 hours on the night in question, and it must follow from that the occupants of that vehicle were at liberty at that stage. If this was the victim's Range Rover, it leaves more than 4 hours unaccounted for. In terms of their movements for the evening in question, no explanation has been found for why the victims did not attend their dinner at the Global Net Cafe, or for the fact they did not make telephone calls, even to explain where they were. Doubts remain over those aspects of Mr. Wright's account which appear to link the incident which he describes to the victim's Range Rover, i.e. his particular memory of the registration number and his memory that the rear passenger wore a white t-shirt. The witness statement of Graham Towns does not add anything of substance to the statements of Mr. and Mrs. Wright. The Commission takes the view that there is no real possibility that the Court of Appeal would find the proposed new evidence to afford a ground for allowing an appeal in this case. The Commission considered Mr. Wright's potential evidence in detail. The Commission commented on the limited assistance that Mr. Wright's evidence could offer the defence case and identified inconsistencies between his evidence and that of his wife. The Commission further commented on the link between television footage of the case and the emergence of Mr. Wright as a witness. The Commission's conclusions are now challenged on the basis that Mr. Wright specifically identified the Range Rover as that which was driven by the victims. Although none of the victims was wearing a white top, as identified by Mr. Wright, Mr. Raymond Wright, who was a prosecution witness at trial, also wrongly said that one passenger had been wearing a pale top, but was nonetheless said to be a credible witness. Mr. Wright does not have any motive to fabricate evidence. Inconsistencies between Mr. Wright and his wife are the natural result of memory loss and all differences of perception. Consequently, they should not be used to discredit the new evidence. The thrust of the further submission in this connection would appear to be an attempt to undermine some of the many individual reasons which together drove the Commission to conclude that there was no real possibility that the Court of Appeal would now admit evidence from Mr. Wright, or from his wife, Sharon Wright, or Mr. Graham Towns. Because in summary, the vehicle described had already passed the entrance to Workhouse Lane and would have had to follow an improbable convoluted route to arrive where the victim's vehicle was discovered. If the vehicle observed by Mr. Wright was that in which the victims were travelling, it was remarkable that there was no evidence as to the activities of the victims in the hours between the suspected time of death and the time Mr. Wright saw the vehicle. There was a period of some hours between the last telephone or personal contact with any of the victims and Mr. Wright's encounter with a Range Rover. There were doubts about the accuracy of details recorded in Mr. Wright's statement. To the extent that the applicants had made representations in respect of Mr. Wright's credibility, the Commission observes that the court might legitimately doubt the credibility of Mr. Wright's account, without doubting his honesty. Specifically, the court might regard as plausible the evidence of Mr. Wright and Mr. Towns that they were involved in an incident with a Range Rover in Rettendon at approximately midnight one night in December 1995, but nonetheless conclude that the argument that this was the vehicle in which the victims were travelling was not credible. Specifically, Mr. Wright, Mrs. Wright and Mr. Towns each said they had been aware of the Rettendon inquiry at the material time, and they had not reported the incident they described to that investigation because they had not at the time regarded the incident as being relevant to the inquiry. Consequently, the Commission remains the view that there is no real possibility that the Court of Appeal would receive evidence from Mr. Wright, and therefore that his evidence is not capable of giving rise to any real possibility that the Court of Appeal might quash these convictions.